President McLaughlin.
Yeah. Here. Yeah. We got White House program.
Secretary of
The committee meets today to receive testimony from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Acting Director of Central Intelligence John E. McLaughlin, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Richard B. Myers, on the implications for the Department of Defense and current and future military operations of proposals to reorganize the U.S. intelligence community. We welcome our witnesses, and I see that you're joined by Dr. Cambone. We welcome you. As they would present jointly to the President any recommendations for key personnel to serve in the various intelligence agencies. So those are two approaches that this Senator is considering, such that we minimize any disruption to the essential collection of intelligence today. Senator Lieberman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you first in welcoming our witnesses today. This is the second hearing before this committee on the subject of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission to reorganize the intelligence community and the implications of such reorganization for the Department of Defense and military operations. For all paramilitary operations, both overt and covert, to the Department of Defense. Currently, the CIA is responsible for covert operations, which require a presidential finding and a prior notification to Congress. These recommendations raise a host of questions that need to be considered as we reform our intelligence community. The relationship between intelligence and defense entities and their specific responsibilities and authorities are not questions of turf. They are vitally important to both the security and well-being of our nation and the safety of our troops. Often, for life and death decisions is independently and objectively analyzed and presented. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Lieberman. Mr. Secretary, we welcome again your appearance here. I recognize you just got back from an important trip to our forces abroad, and recognize that you've been in consultation this morning at the White House, I presume, perhaps to this subject and others, and we're anxious to hear your views. And may I courteously ask that you bring the microphone up as close as possible, because we have a very full room and the acoustics somewhat diminished.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the subject of strengthening the intelligence community in the United States, as well as some of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. Needless to say, some of what I will be saying will be my personal views, because while the President has made a number of decisions and announced them that he believes will improve the intelligence community, some aspects of his proposals are still under discussion, and in that case I may very well be back someday to discuss those decisions as they arrive. As you know, he's proposed the establishment of a National Intelligence Director, as the Commission recommended, the creation of a National Counterterrorism Center, and the issuance of a number of executive orders to implement other recommendations of the Commission, such as reform of the community's information sharing. U.S. reliance on intelligence for security would not be as substantial as it had been. Events have proven otherwise, and we need to recognize that. To conclude, let me return to where I began. I'm still concerned about our country's intelligence capabilities, but that concern stems not from a lack of confidence in the men and women in the intelligence community. They have fashioned important achievements over recent years, and I believe our country owes them a debt of gratitude. And it will be a long time, if ever, that many of their achievements are fully and broadly known and appreciated. The Department of Defense and its counterparts in the intelligence community are forging, during a war, a strong interlocking relationship between intelligence and operations, between national and tactical intelligence, and between foreign and military intelligence. And we've worked hard to close the gaps and seams that these terms imply. My concerns are rooted in the new realities of this 21st century, and certainly the Department is ready to work with you and to further strengthen our ability to live in this new and dangerous world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Director McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as this committee considers reorganization proposals by the President, the Cain Commission, and the Congress, I want to speak for a moment about the structure and capabilities of the U.S. intelligence community as it exists today, not in 2001. I think it's important that we do that at the beginning of these deliberations. And I believe that today's intelligence community provides a much stronger foundation for any changes you want to make as we move forward than most people might realize. That said, there is no question we can still do better. And I'll close with some thoughts on how that can be accomplished. Because of this committee's special responsibilities, I need to say a word, as the Secretary did, about the intelligence community's support for the warfighter. And as we discuss various proposals for restructuring the intelligence community today, let me be clear about one thing. No matter what course the administration and Congress choose, intelligence to support to the military, especially in time of war, should not be allowed to diminish. And I believe such support can and will be preserved under any of the options being considered. No one would think about it in any other way. Everyone in the intelligence community understands that NSA, NGA, NRO, all vital parts of the national intelligence community, are also combat support agencies. I regret to close with a series of questions, but I believe they illustrate the complexity of these issues and the need to proceed cautiously and with care as we contemplate changes to an intelligence system on which the nation must depend more than ever for its security. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Director McLaughlin, for a very frank and candid appraisal of this situation, drawing on many, many years of experience that you've had with the agency. General Myers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Levin, and members of the committee for your support of our ongoing efforts to improve our intelligence capabilities. As you know, our military has been working diligently since 9/11 to break down intelligence barriers and to better integrate with other agencies of our government and our allies. We've accomplished a great deal, but we still have much work left to do. And I can think of no more important issue to our national security and to the men and women of our armed forces in harm's way around the world. Reorganizing the intelligence community is a complex and difficult task, and the decisions made will have enormous consequences far into the future. Opportunities like this only come along once in a long time, perhaps in a lifetime. The last intelligence reform of the magnitude we're now considering was in 1947. So we've got to be careful as we proceed. While I support the concept of a National Intelligence Director, I'd like to articulate what I think are some critical parameters as we move forward. As Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I am continually mindful of the fact that the Department of Defense's intelligence capabilities are an important part of the nation's overall intelligence community, and these assets support national security in the broadest sense. At the same time, the warfighter, from the combatant commander down to the private on patrol, timely, accurate, intelligence is literally a life and death matter every day. In my judgment, the military's dependence on intelligence is unique and on a scale unparalleled in our government. In fact, in today's threat environment, we no longer have a distinct boundary between operations and intelligence. You know, traditionally, we've thought of intelligence as support, a support function. That's an outdated way of thinking. DoD's intelligence people are an integral part of the warfighting team. Once again, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, I thank you for your support. This is a sacred responsibility that we share, protecting the lives of our servicemen and women, preserving our way of life for future generations. I look forward to working with you in this important work and to answering your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, General, for an important contribution. Senator Sessions.
Chairman Myers, can you share with us how the military officers, maybe your chiefs, feel about the new National Intelligence Director proposal? I know there's some frustration I've sensed that we wish we'd had better intelligence on, I guess, in every conflict we've ever been in. But how do your people respond to this?
Well, one of my responsibilities, of course, is to represent to the Secretary and others in the National Security Council. The President, of course, is the thinking of our combatant commanders, and for that matter, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Let me start out by saying we clearly have the greatest military in the world, and part of the reason it is the greatest military in the world is because we've got this integration of operations intelligence that I talked about earlier in my opening statement. So with that as backdrop, we have talked now on many occasions with our combatant commanders and with the service chiefs on intelligence and intelligence reform. I think they would sign up to my opening statement and some of the tenets in there and some things that we hold very, very important. They're clearly in favor of breaking down any bureaucratic barriers to getting information and information sharing, and they address that as we have this discussion. That's one of the primary topics that comes up. They strongly believe that it's hard to differentiate between this national, strategic, and tactical levels of intelligence. They understand that and think that intelligence needs to move seamlessly, not only vertically but horizontally between organizations, services, analytical elements, whatever, as well as vertically. So they understand that. They would make a big point if they were sitting here about the need for competitive analysis.
Thank you for your service. I think you have every right to speak aggressively about the good things that have occurred since 9/11.
Senator McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for announcing that we'll have the hearing in September. And Director McLaughlin, the reports from whatever source indicate that our greatest, or certainly the top 2 or 3 greatest failings has been in human intelligence. Mr. Lind from California was able to join and train with the Taliban and fight against the United States, but we've never been able to insert any kind of person into the Al-Qaeda or other terrorist organizations. What in the 9/11 Commission recommendations do you believe will help us in this issue?
Well, first, Senator, with all due respect, I would dispute the premise. And in closed session, I could explain that we have been able to achieve what you suggest we haven't been able to achieve.
It's not my suggestion, it's the suggestion of the 9/11 Commission.
Well, I'm talking...
It's the conclusion of the 9/11 Commission.
Well, the way I would characterize it is, at the time of 9/11, we clearly had human sources within the sanctuary, or we would not have been met on the ground on September 27th by people welcoming us into Afghanistan. So we had a network of human sources in Afghanistan at that time I believe the 9/11 Commission notes that.
Well, I've only got 6 minutes.
My comment at the outset, frankly, was more about the post-9/11 period, when I think our human has improved. Now, in terms of your question about what in the 9/11 Commission recommendations would help us acquire better human,
That's why, should the President's proposal to create a National Intelligence Director be adopted, I believe that individuals should have the clear authority to move people and resources and to evaluate the performance of the national intelligence agencies and their leaders. Does that include control over their budgets?
as you know, as the Secretary said, this is all being debated. If you want my personal view, I would say yes.
Thank you very much, Director McLaughlin, and I also want to thank you for your outstanding service to the country for many, many years. We're very appreciative of it, and we know it will continue. Finally, could we talk about stovepiping again? Do you believe that the recommendations will prevent a reoccurrence of such as happened when FBI agents reported that people were taking pilot training in Phoenix and the information never got to the right people?
I think we're close to fixing that problem now, and I think some version of a National Counterterrorism Center would take us even further. The reason I think we're close to fixing that now, a whole series of things have changed since 9/11. And it goes to the kind of, let me start at the top. It goes to the kind of personal relationship that exists between the director of the FBI and the director of CIA. During this last 2 weeks, for example, when we were struggling with the terrorism alerts, Bob Mueller and I were on the phone continuously with each other, working through issues. There's no impediment there. We now have senior FBI officers embedded in our counterterrorism center. One comes every day, a senior officer, to my meeting at 5 o'clock where we work through terrorism problems around the world, and that person is responsible for making sure that everything at that table, the most sensitive intelligence, is available back in the FBI. In the Terrorism Threat Integration Center, it's not inconsequential what's going on there. It's not built yet entirely, but we now have FBI officers, CIA officers, officers from Homeland Security, and any number of other agencies sitting in one building, a stone's throw away from each other, exchanging information. So I actually think, and the other thing I'd point out, and Bob Mueller needs to speak for himself on this, but I work closely enough with him that I think I could characterize something he's doing that relates to the problem you just pointed out. He has underway a vigorous effort to develop a reporting system from all of his constituent field offices coming into a central hub where that reporting would then be funneled out to people who need it. And that's essentially the kind of reporting system we've had in the foreign intelligence arena for many years. A case officer meets someone in a back alley in Egypt, sends in a report. That's distributed to people all around the world who need to see it. And that's what Director Mueller's working to create and making progress in creating. So not to say there aren't problems to go here, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Time give the President a variety of options and a variety of opinions. But having said all of that, my question to you, Secretary Rumsfeld, the Commission tells us that if we're going to win this war, we have to deny our enemy sanctuaries. Could you tell the committee, without disclosing any secret information, what countries, in your opinion, are providing sanctuary to Al-Qaeda or terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda? And what strategy do we have to dry that sanctuary up? Secretary Rumsfeld.
Yes, I'm doing something that's strange. I'm thinking how to respond.
Because that's a tough question.
It is a tough question. Let me.
Who are they and what do we do about them?
Well, let me answer the first question first. You talked about whether or not the NID ought to have all the power, and I think it's terribly important that we ask ourselves the question, all the power for what?
Right.
You were talking about the global war on terror. The intelligence community, as we said, has a much broader set of tasks. And we do not want to organize the intelligence community to fit one element,
Right.
important to be sure, but to fit any one element because the responsibilities are so broad. Second, with respect to sanctuaries, you used the phrase, which countries are providing it? There are sanctuaries that are provided by countries, as we know. There are also sanctuaries that are not provided by the countries at all. They have portions of their countries that they do not govern effectively and cannot govern effectively. And then there are countries that aren't countries. Somalia is a situation that is a geographical country, but in terms of a government, I don't think it could be said, John, correct me if you disagree, but I don't think it could be said that they have a government that presides over the real estate in that country in an effective way. And I guess the word sanctuary also is a problem because you have to define it. Is the ability to use the banking system a sanctuary? Is the ability to use wire transfers, cyberspace, is that a sanctuary? We know that seams are used effectively. I mean, the Pakistan-Afghan border is a problem. The Saudi-Yemeni border is a problem. The Syrian-Iraqi border is a problem. The Iranian border is a problem. We know that countries vary in their behavior with respect to terrorists, that some are aggressive and go after them, that some tolerate them and don't do much about them, and in fact are kind of fellow travelers with it, but not active.
Would Iran be in the country that tolerates and does very little about them?
Well, it's a mixture. And I think John would be better to answer this, but I mean, clearly they are active with Hezbollah, and that's a terrorist organization by our definition. And clearly there have been, and probably are today, Al-Qaeda in Iran that they have not dealt with in a way that a country that was against Al-Qaeda would have done. They have had the Ansar al-Islam organization back and forth across their borders. John, do you want to elaborate? You're the expert.
No, those are all the right points, Mr. Secretary. If you were talking about Iran, I think the Secretary said it accurately. It's on this score a bit schizophrenic. You'll find elements of the government that are uncomfortable with this, but the prevailing elements in that government are tolerant toward terrorists, and there's no question that they support actively Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah draws its inspiration and origins from Iran back in the late 70s and continues to this day to be dedicated to the destruction of Israel and to receive support from Iran for that purpose.
Senator, I thank you very much. Colleagues, as we know, the Government Operations Committee started in quite early this morning with a hearing. It would be my intent now, as a respect, I'd like to turn to Senator Lieberman, but I understand a colleague has a very critical, Mr. Nelson, you were next. Can you two sort it out who would go first here?
I'll be glad to yield to Senator Nelson.
Thank you.
And I thank you, and gentlemen, thank you for your public service. The question is, General Myers, please explain why giving the National Intelligence Director control over intelligence funding causes problems with an effective military response to terrorism overseas. This is one of the significant policy issues that we are facing in deciding with regard to the new National Intelligence Director. General Myers?
Well, I think the Secretary has talked a great deal about the budget and the implications of the budget. I would go back to the fundamentals that I had in my opening statement, and that it's not the budget authorities that are the problem at all. and that can be whatever people decide it is, as far as I'm concerned. The thing that you have to maintain through this is the fact that we now have, in terms of overseas, a warfighting team. And it's a warfighting team that operates in peacetime or wartime. It produces intelligence that is used at the national level and is used at the tactical level. This team depends on all the different departments and agencies that have intel responsibilities, not just those that are in the Department of Defense. They are, as Director McLaughlin talked about, pretty tightly integrated today. So I've never said one way or another where the budget authority should be. That is still being debated inside the administration. It's being debated here today. I would just say, as we look at placing budget authorities, we need to make sure that this extremely important element of our intelligence apparatus, and I will call it military intelligence, but it doesn't really do it justice because we're so tightly linked and integrated today, that we don't break that apart. And that whatever we do budget-wise, that everybody has a voice in the process. Today, that pretty much happens. So, as has been said before, the first thing we should do is do no harm. And it's a lot better than it was on 9/11, and as I said in my statement, it's pretty good. We can still improve that.
As a uniformed military officer, do you think that giving the NID budgetary authority is going to cause you a problem militarily to respond to terrorism overseas?
The devil's in the details, and I don't think inherently no. I don't think that will necessarily cause a problem. But the devil is in the details, and in this town, we have people that have certain authorities, but there is no czar in this town. That's not how the business works. It is a town where we collaborate and coordinate. That's certainly true in the intelligence community, where, again, there are many different agencies and departments that are involved in that work. And so, no, I have no problems with moving budget authority around, as long as we work through the details to make sure that the collaboration and the coordination that needs to take place recognizes things that I said earlier.
Secretary Cambone, same question.
All right. The question is how the budget and its allocation translates into frontline capabilities. And that, in turn, is representative of the various interests that are at play in building that budget at the direction of the DCI today. Within the Department of Defense, something like 68% of DoD personnel are in the NFIT budget. So the budget that is built by the DCI is 68% personnel from the Department of Defense. Overall, of those 15 agencies that everyone talks about, 83% of those personnel are DoD personnel. So they are integrated across all of the activities of the intelligence community, and they are there to be certain that two things happen simultaneously. One is to assure the national support. The Secretary of Defense is obliged under Title 50 to lend that support to the DCI, and they are obliged to be assured that the DCI, that the Secretary of Defense is able to discharge his Title 10 responsibilities relative to the armed forces of the United States. The budget, all in one place, with all of those decisions being made in one place, Defense or the DCI or the NID would probably be changing those relationships in ways that we don't understand today. And that's why we actually have a bargain here, a partnership between the DCI and the Secretary of Defense. The DCI builds the budget. The Secretary of Defense is expected to see that it's executed against those priorities that were set for national intelligence and meets the military intelligence requirements. So that's the bargain we've struck.
So you would think that there might be a problem created if someone outside the Department of Defense, namely the National Intelligence Director, has budgetary authority over all intelligence, which, as you said, huge part of that personnel and money is within the DoD.
I'd be concerned about two words, Senator: sole authority and all activities. So you'd have to work, again, it's a partnership, and it was designed that way by the Congress and by presidents and DCIs and SecDefs in the past to make sure it is a partnership so that no one has sole authority or all of the authority.
Mr. Secretary Rumsfeld, would you care to respond?
I would agree with what I said earlier and what Dr. Cambone just said.
Thank you very much, Senator Lieberman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary and witnesses, thanks for being here. Mr. Secretary, I want to share this experience. As I arrived late from the earlier hearing, I said to a few of my colleagues, how are things going? And they said with a certain unease, the Secretary, contrary to what we normally expect of him, opinionated, refreshingly opinionated quite often, is not responding to specific questions about the authority of the National Intelligence Director proposal. I found the kind of unease that you'd have on a day when your dog stopped barking. And I want to ask you whether there isn't a way, perhaps borrowed from your current joint operations with CIA, for instance, where you couldn't have the counterterrorism center's planning operations, but then subjected to a review or a veto by the Secretary of Defense, so we don't lose the plus, the synergy of everybody being around the table together.
Senator, first, the reason the dog didn't bark is clear. Number one, the executive branch is wrestling with these issues,
right,
and they're tough issues, and the president has not come to final conclusions on them. Second is I have been inviting in former secretaries of defense, former DCIs, former national security advisors. I met at lunch with Dick Myers, called in the former chairman and vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've called people to talk about these issues because they're terribly important. I've spent a lot of time, and I have not developed conviction on a lot of the details that, and as we said, the devil's in the details. You darn well better get it right, because we're dealing with very important things for our country, and I just haven't gotten conviction down to the third and fourth level in this yet to feel that I can sit here and say authoritatively something.
Well, I understand that and I respect it.
Once you get down to the point where you have a plan that's executable, it darn well better have been intimately crafted and shaped to fit the circumstances and the talents and the skill sets and the assets and the circumstances of that situation.
I thank the Senator. Thank you. Senator Chambliss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And
because they will roll out as each country is dealt with, and with one country may be our first choice, and we would go to them, try to work out an arrangement. If it doesn't work out, we have other options. Then we would slide off that and go somewhere else. But the broad thrust of it was what we briefed and what we've offered to brief. And as I said earlier, we'd be happy to hold a hearing on this and give you anything we've got.
That opportunity will be given. I thank you, Mr. Secretary. I thank you, Director. I thank you, General. We've had a very good hearing.